Hello students, welcome back. This is a special presentation regarding the formation of unit cells in the structure of crystalline solids. This is still unit 11, but we have been discussing the properties of liquids, and what we're going to do now is discuss a little bit of the properties of solids. Again, when we study the properties of solids, our brains go to work and we want to provide some kind of a framework for organizing the information that's out there for us. And so one of the things is we classify solids into two large categories. An amorphous solid is one that doesn't possess a well-defined arrangement or any long-range molecular order. A crystalline solid is the one that possesses rigid, long-range order. In a crystalline solid, the atoms or molecules or ions that make it up occupy specific positions and therefore they are predictable. Let's consider the diagram here that we see. And for example, let's consider that a crystal lattice of a solid is formed perhaps by the expansion in 3 dimensions of a single unit cell, the basic repeating structural unit of a crystalline solid. So you can see the crystal lattice in the middle as essentially an extension in 3 dimensions of the single unit cell that you see here on the bottom left. The positions of the particles at the corners of, in this case, this unit cell is called a lattice point. In different solids, those lattice points are occupied by different kinds of particles. They could be atoms, they could be molecules, or they could be ions. Another parameter that we study when we look at these crystal structures is how many particles a given particle is in contact with. We call this the coordination number. For example, in an ionic compound, where the lattice points are occupied by alternating charges of ions, essentially for an ion, the coordination number is going to be the number of oppositely charged ions that particular ion is in contact with. Because the particles occupy these lattice points, that means that there is quite a bit of space in between them. A high coordination number means that every particle at a lattice point is involved in more interactions, and therefore there are going to be stronger attractive forces holding the crystal together. To account for the proportion of the volume of a unit cell that is occupied by actual particles versus what is empty space, we can calculate what is called the packing efficiency. It's the percentage of the volume in the unit cell that is actually occupied by particles. In other words, that has mass. Once more, the higher the coordination number, the more efficiently the particles are going to be packed together. I would like for you to watch this video because it explains in more detail how these different structures are assembled. And after we finish this, I will tell you what is the information that you actually need to remember about this. The video is going to go into very minute details in terms of 3-dimensional space and how these units are assembled. But I want to make sure that you, first of all, enjoy the video, but also that you focus on the things that are going to be important to us in our coming discussions. All right? So I give you a video about packing in crystal structures.
If you could travel within a crystalline solid, you would see the particles, atoms, ions, or molecules arranged in a regular array. Here, the spaces are greatly exaggerated, but in reality, the particles are packed close together. The unit cell of a crystal structure is the smallest portion that defines the structure. Stacking unit cells next to each other in all 3 directions gives the structure. Many elements and simple compounds have unit cells from the cubic crystal system. Let's examine the three types of cubic unit cells. All cubic unit cells have particles at the corners of a cube. The simple or primitive cubic unit cell has particles at the corners only. In reality, the particles lie as close to each other as possible. Note that the particles touch along the cube edges, but not along a diagonal in the face or along a diagonal through the body. By slicing away parts that belong to neighboring unit cells, we see that the actual unit cell consists of portions of the particles. When the cells pack next to each other in all three dimensions, we obtain the crystal. If we fade the others out, you can see the original group of 8 particles within the array and the unit cell within that group. We find the number of particles in one unit cell by combining all the particles' portions. In the simple cubic unit cell, 8 corners, each of which is 1/8 of a particle, combine to give 1 particle. A key feature of a crystal structure is its coordination number, the number of the nearest neighbors surrounding each particle. In a simple cubic array, any given particle has a neighboring particle above, below, to the right, to the left, in front, and in back of it for a total of 6 nearest neighbors. The body-centered cubic unit cell has a particle at each corner and one in the center, which is colored pink to make it easier to see. With full-size spheres, you can see that the particles don't touch along the edges of the cube, but each corner particle does touch the one in the center. The actual unit cell consists of portions of the corner particles and the whole one in the center. 8/8 give 1 particle, and the one in the center gives another for a total of 2 particles. In this tiny portion of a body-centered cubic array, you can see that any given particle has 4 nearest neighbors above and 4 below for a total of 8 nearest neighbors. The face-centered cubic unit cell has a particle at each corner and in each face, which are colored yellow here, but none in the center. The corner particles don't touch each other, but each corner does touch a particle in the face, and those in the faces touch each other as well. The actual unit cell consists of portions of particles at the corners and in the faces. 8/8 at the corners gives 1 particle, and half a particle in each of 6 faces gives 3 more, for a total of 4 particles. In this tiny portion of a face-centered cubic array, notice that a given particle has 4 nearest neighbors around it, 4 more above and 4 more below for a total of 12 nearest neighbors. Stacking spheres shows how the 3 cubic unit cells arise. Arrange a layer of spheres in horizontal and vertical rows. Note the large diamond-shaped space among the particles. Placing the next layer directly over the first gives a structure based on the simple cubic unit cell. Those larger spaces mean an inefficient use of space. In fact, only 52% of the available volume is actually occupied by spheres. Because of this inefficiency, the simple cubic unit cell is seen rarely in nature. A more efficient stacking occurs if we place the second layer over the spaces formed by the first layer, and the third layer over the spaces formed by the second. That simple change leads to 68% of the available volume occupied by the spheres and a structure based on the body-centered cubic unit cell. Many metals, including all the alkali metals, adopt this arrangement. For the most efficient stacking, shift every other row in the first layer so the large diamond-shaped spaces become smaller triangular spaces, and place the second layer over them. Then the third layer goes over the holes visible through the first and second layers. In this arrangement, called cubic closest packing, spheres occupy 74% of the volume. Note that it is based on the face-centered cubic unit cell. Many elements, Covalent compounds, and, as you'll see in the next two examples, ionic compounds adopt cubic closest packing. Sodium chloride adopts the sodium chloride or rock salt structure, as do many other alkali, halides, alkaline earth oxides and sulfides, and other ionic compounds. Picture separate face-centered cubic arrays of chloride ions and sodium ions as they approach and interpenetrate each other. The smaller sodium ions fit in the holes between the larger chloride ions and the NaCl unit cell. Zinc sulfide adopts the zinc blend structure, as do the copper-1 halides and several other compounds. If face-centered cubic arrays of zinc ions and sulfide ions approach and interpenetrate slightly offset from each other, each ion becomes surrounded tetrahedrally by 4 of the other ions. Note the blinking zinc ion and the 4 sulfides. You can see the relative positions in this slightly expanded view of the zinc blend unit cell.
Okay, the video describes the packing of particles inside these crystal structures in a way that I would not be able to. At the same time, it gives you a lot of information, so what I'd like for you to do is to focus on just a couple of aspects here. Here is what I need you to remember. We just need to remember that many solids are packed in a form that is represented by 3 different kinds of cubic unit cells: the simple cubic, the body-centered cubic, and the face-centered cubic unit cells. All I need you to remember is what is the difference between the 4 arrangements, and then how many atoms or particles we pack per unit cell. We saw that in the simple cubic unit cell, if we consider that only 1/8 of each particle is actually contained inside that particular unit cell, and we have 8 corners in there, that means that we have 1 total particle, or atom in this case, per unit cell. For the body-centered cubic cell, we have the same, but we also add 1 particle right in the middle, which is totally contained inside the unit cell, for a total of 2 atoms or 2 particles per unit cell. In the face-centered cubic cell, again, each one of the corner particles is shared amongst 8 different cells. So 1/8 of each particle is inside the unit cell, and then 1/2 of each one of the particles on the face of the cube is part of this 1 unit cell. That gives us a total of 4 atoms or 4 particles per unit cell. This is all I need you to remember. There is a bunch of geometry that we can do with these different unit cells, but the main thing that we're going to be considering, and we'll discuss this in our lecture next time, is what is the length on the side of this cubic unit cell. The dimension that would be expressed here by A, and also the dimension expressed here by R, which would be the atomic radius. Something we discussed back in the unit where we discussed the trends in the periodic properties of elements. All right, so please bear in mind, these are the things that I want you to remember. Please do not get lost in trying to understand or explain every single aspect of the video you just watched. This is the important information, and we'll see you next time.